And I do not despair of one day discovering the ornament that could be raised or lowered at will, so as to admit of the ghost's mysterious correspondence with Madame Gurley and of his generosity. However, all these discoveries are nothing to my mind compared with that which I was able to make. In the presence of the acting manager in the manager's office within a couple of inches of the desk chair, and which consisted of a trapdoor and the width of a board in the flooring and the length of a man's forearm, no longer a trapdoor that fell back like the lid of a box, trapdoor through which I can see a hand come and dexterously fumble at a pocket with a swallow coat-tail. That is the way the 40,000 francs went. And that also is by the way which, through some trick or another, they were returned. Speaking about this to the Persian, I said, so we may take it as the 40,000 francs were returned, that Eric was simply amusing himself with the memorandum book of his? Don't you believe it, he replied. Eric wanted money, thinking himself without the pale of humanity. He was restrained by no scruples, and he employed his extraordinary gifts of dexterity and imagination which he had received by way of compensation for his extraordinary ugliness, to prey upon his fellow men. His reason for restoring the 40,000 francs of his own accord was that he had no longer wanted it. He had relinquished his marriage with Christine Daae. He had relinquished everything above to the surface of the earth. According to the Persian's account, Eric was born in a small town not far from Rouen. He was the son of a master mason. He ran away at an early age from his father's house, where his ugliness was a subject of horror and terror to his parents. For a time he frequented the fairs, where a show men exhibited him as the living corpse. He seemed to have crossed the whole of Europe from fair to fair, and to have completed his strange education as an artist and magician at the very fountainhead of art and magic among the gypsies. A period of Eric's life remained quite obscure. He was seen as at the fair in Nizhny Novgorod, where he displayed himself in all his hideous glory. He already sang as nobody on this earth had ever sung before. He practiced ventriloquism and gave displays of legerdemain so extraordinary that the caravans returning to Asia talked about it during the whole length of their journey. In this way, his reputation penetrated the walls of the palace of Mazarjane, where the little sultan, the favorite of the Shah-Nishan, was boring herself to death. The dealers of furs returning to Samsmark and from Nizhny Novgorod told of the marvels which he had seen performed in Eric's tent. The traders was summoned to the palace, and the Durgana of Mazaran was told to question him. Next, the Durgana was instructed to go and find Eric. He brought him to Persia, where for some months Eric's will was law. He was guilty of not a few horrors, for he seemed not to know the difference between good and evil. He took part calmly in a number of political assassinations, and he turned his diabolical inventive powers against the Emir of Afghanistan, who was at war with the Persian Empire. The Shah took a liking to him. This was the time of the rosy hours of Mazaran, of which the Durgana's narrative has given us a glimpse. Eric had very original ideas on the subject of architecture and thought out a place much as a conjurer contrives a trick casket. The Shah ordered him to construct an evidence of this kind. Eric did so, and the building appears to have been so indigenous that His Majesty was able to move about in it unseen and to disappear without the possibility of the tricks being discovered. When the Shah found himself the possessor of this gem, he ordered Eric's yellow eyes to be put out. But he reflected that, even when blind, Eric would still be able to build so remarkable a house for another sovereign, and also that as long as Eric was alive, someone would know the secret of the wonderful palace. Eric's death was decided upon, together with that of all of his abominable decree devolved upon the Durga of Mazaran. Eric had shown him some slight services and procured him many a hearty laugh. He saved Eric by providing him with the means of escape, but nearly paid with his head for his generous indulgence. Fortunately for Durgana, a corpse half eaten by the birds of prey was found on the shore of the Caspian Sea, and was taken for Eric's body, because the Durgana's friends had dressed the remains in clothing that belonged to Eric. The Durgana was let off with the loss of the imperial favor and the confiscation of his property and an order of perpetual banishment. Perpetual banishment. There we go. As a member of the royal house, however, he continued to receive his monthly pension for a few hundred francs from the Persian treasury, and on this he came to live in Paris. As for Eric, he went to Ursa Minor and thence a Constantinople, where he entered the Sultan's employment. In explanation of the services which he was able to render a monarch haunted by perpetual terrors, I need only say that it was Eric who constructed all of the famous trapdoors and secret chambers and mysterious strong boxes, which were found at Yıldızayk kiosk after the last Turkish revolution. He also invented those automata dressed like the Sultan and resembling the Sultan in all respects. See the interview of the special correspondent of Metin and Mohammed Ali Bey on the day after the entry of the Salonika troops into Constantinople, which made people believe that the commander of the faithful was awake at one place, when in reply he was asleep elsewhere. Of course, he had to leave the Sultan's service for the same reasons that made him fly from Persia. He knew too much, then tried his adventurous, formidable, and monstrous life. He longed to be someone like everybody else, and he had become a contractor, like any ordinary contractor, building ordinary buildings with ordinary bricks. He tendered for part of the foundations in the opera. His estimate was accepted. When he found himself in the cellars of the enormous playhouse, his artistic, fantastic wizard nature resumed the upper hand. Besides, was he not as ugly as ever? He dreamed of creating for his own use and dwelling unknown to the rest of the earth, where he could hide from men's eyes for all time. The reader knows and guesses the rest. It is all in keeping with this incredible and yet efficacious story. Poor unhappy Eric. Shall we pity him? Shall we curse him? He asked only to be someone, like everybody else. But he was too ugly. And he had to hide his genius or use it to play tricks with. With an ordinary face, he would have been one of the most distinguished of mankind. He had a heart that could have held the empire of the world, and in the end, he had to content himself with a cellar. Ah, yes, we must needs pity the opera ghost. I have prayed over his mortal remains, that God might show him mercy, notwithstanding his crimes, yes. I am quite sure that I prayed beside his body the other day, when they took it from the spot where they were burying the phonographic records. It was his skeleton. I did not recognize it by the ugliness of the head, for all men are ugly when they have been dead as long as that, but by the plain gold ring which he wore, and which Christine Daae had certainly slipped on his finger when she came back to bury him in accordance with her promise. The skeleton was lying near the little well, in the place where the angel of music first held Christine Daae, fainting in his trembling arms on the night when he carried her down to the cellars of the opera house. And now, what do they mean to do with that skeleton? Surely they will not bury it in the common grave. I say that the place of the skeleton of the opera ghost is in the archives of the National Academy of Music. It is no ordinary skeleton. I know I originally said I wasn't going to read the publisher's note, but I'm curious what they have to say. We're going to do it anyway. And obviously, I'm not pressed for time anymore. It's been way longer than I suspected this would originally take me to read, so we're going for broke. Publisher's note on the Paris Opera House from the original American edition of Phantom of the Opera, 1911. That Mr. Leroux has used for the scene of his story, the Paris Opera House, as it really is, and has not created a building out of his imagination, is shown by this interesting description of it taken from an article which appeared in Scribner's magazine in 1879. A short time after the building was completed, the new opera house commenced under the Empire and finished under the Republic. Is the most complete building of the kind in the world, and in many respects the most beautiful. No European capital possesses an opera house or comprehensive in plan and execution, and none can boast an edifice equally vast and splendid. The site of the opera house was chosen in 1861. It was determined to lay the foundation exceptionally deep and strong. It was well known that water would be met with, but it was impossible to foresee at what depth or in what quantity it would be found. Exceptional depth also was necessary at this stage. Arrangements were to be such as to admit a scene 50 feet high to be lowered on its frame. It was therefore necessary to lay a foundation in a soil soaked with water, which should be significantly solid to sustain the weight of 22 billion pounds, and at the same time to be perfectly dry as the cellars were intended for the storage. The scenery of properties. While the work was in progress, the excavation was kept free from the waters by means of 8 pumps worked by steam power. In operation without interruption, day and night. From March 2nd to October 13th, the floor of the cellar was covered with a layer of concrete, then with 2 coats of cement, another layer of concrete, and a coat of bitumen. The walls included an outer wall built as a cofferdam, a brick wall, a coat of cement, and a wall proper, a little over a yard thick. After all this was done and the hole was filled with water in order that the fluid was penetrating into the most minute interstices might deposit a sediment which would close them more surely and perfectly than it would be possible to do by hand. 12 years elapsed before the completion of the building, and during that time it was demonstrated that the precautions taken secured absolute impermeability and solidity. The events of 1870 interrupted the works just as it was about to be persecuted most vigorously, and the new opera house was to put to new and unexpected uses. During the siege, it was converted into a vast military storehouse and filled with a Herodias mass of goods. After the siege, the building fell into the hands of the commune, and the roof was turned into a balloon station. The damage was done, however, was slight. The fine store employed in the construction was brought from quarries in Sweden, Scotland, Italy, Algeria, Finland, Spain, Belgium, and France. While work on the exterior was in progress, the building was covered in by a wooden shell, rendered transparent by thousands of small panes of glass. In 1867, a swarm of men supplied with hammers and axes stripped the house of its habit, and showed in all its splendor the great structure. No picture can do justice to the rich colors of the evident edifice, or to the harmonious tone resulting from the skillful use of many diverse materials. The effect of the montage is completed by the cupola of the auditorium, topped with a cap of bronze sparingly adorned with gilding. Farther on a level with the towers of Notre Dame, is the gable end of the roof of the stage, a Pegasus by Monsieur Lesquesne, rising at the end of the roof, and a bronze group by Monsieur Millet representing Apollo lifting his gold lyre, commanding the apex. Apollo, it may here be mentioned, is useful as well as ornamental for his lyre. I'm getting hot. And not in an attractive way. There we go. Also, I need some water. Oh well. We'll have to stick a pin in that one. It tipped with its metal point, which does duty as a lightning rod and conducts the fluid to the body and down the nether limbs of the god. The splendor, having climbed 10 steps and left behind him a gateway reaching a vestibule in which are statues of Lully, Ramdu, Gluck, and Handel. 10 steps of green Swedish marble led to a second vestibule for ticket sellers. Visitors who entered by the pavilion reserved for carriages pass through the hallway where ticket offices are situated. Wake up, Honor, come on. The larger number of the audience before entering the auditorium traverse a large circular vestibule located exactly beneath it. The ceiling of this portion of the building is upheld by 16 fluted columns of Jura stone with white marble capitals forming a portico. Here servants are to await their masters and spectators. Many remain until their carriages are summoned. The third entrance, which is quite distinct from the others, is reserved for the executive. The section of the building set aside for the use of the Emperor Napoleon was to have included an antechamber for the bodyguards, a salon for the aides de camp, a large salon and a smaller one for the Empress hat and cloak rooms, etc. Moreover, there were to be in close proximity to the entrance stables for 3 coaches for the outer outriders horses and for the 21 horsemen acting as an escort, a station for a squad of infantry and 31 men and 10 sentry guards, and stables for the horses and the latter, and besides a salon for 15 to 20 domestics. Thus arrangements had to be made to accommodate in this part of the building about 100 persons, 50 horses, and half a dozen carriages. The fall of the empire suggested some changes, but ample provision still exists for emergencies. Its novel conception, perfect fitness, and rare splendor of material made the grand stairway unquestionably one of the most remarkable features of the building. It presents to the splendor who has just passed through the subscribers' pavilion, a gorgeous picture. From this point, he beholds the ceiling formed by the central landing. This and the columns sustaining it, the Achillean stone. And this guy goes on for like, okay, we're almost to the afterword. It's like, yeah, let's put the afterword after the thing about the real life stuff, so we've completely forgotten everything that we just heard about the characters. Yeah, sure, let's do that. That makes sense. You know what? I think I'm done. I've been working on this for 3 years. I think I can skip the afterword and whatever this is about the opera house. I think I'm good. So yeah, I've been working on this dramatic reading for 3 years. Originally I had it in the lineup for what I wanted to do was